welcome to the show. On today's show, because it's a big topic going on right now, especially here in Alberta, I want to talk about the ramifications and or the process of Alberta separating from Canada. This is all from an Indigenous point of view because I'm Indigenous, of course. My hair is terrible here right now. So, we hear in the news, we feel it when we're out and about, people wanting to separate from Canada because they feel we're getting a raw deal being part of Canada. So, is that really the truth with Alberta? I mean, there's 5 million people in Alberta. What are we at? We're at about 40 million people in Canada now. So 5 divided by 4. That's 11% of the population of Canada lives in Alberta. That's very low. I mean, there's the territories and other provinces like PEI, which have way less population than we do. They seem to be just fine. But let's talk about the nuts and bolts. Canada. Who owns the land right now in Canada? I'm going to show you, share my screen. Yes. So let's see what that looks like. Maybe I can adjust that a little bit. Make it a little bit bigger. Anyway, here's Canada. Right at the bottom, we have the physical land. That's the land base. That's the Turtle Island. That's all the province. That's everything. Initially, that would have been all of North America. But in our context, we're talking about the landmass that makes up Canada. So, we have the land. Then we have the treaties. The treaties with the Indigenous peoples across Canada is what created Canada. Without the treaties, Canada would not exist. They were friendship treaties, treaties on how we would share the land. The wordage of the treaties was designed to trick the Indigenous people, but now through court cases and common law and things like that, it has been proven that that was not the spirit of the treaties that the Indigenous people were agreeing to sign. The word cede, give up, was interpreted as share. The Indigenous people only signed these treaties because they were sharing the land. They were sharing the territory. So then we have our two forms of government that overlap and share the territory, right? We have all the Indigenous governments, which are grouped into treaty areas, but the treaty areas themselves are not an official level of government. The treaties aren't federal or provincial governments. The individual Indigenous nations are governments. The individual nations are federal governments. Individual Indigenous nations are equal in partnership, sharing the land with the federal government. The federal Canadian government, the colonial government, you might say, the federal government, the Canadian government, has chosen to create levels of government for themselves. It's still all the Canadian government, but they've chosen to say this territory will be run by a provincial government, and these individual communities or municipalities will be governed by an even smaller body. They've chosen to separate their federal government into these 3 levels so that they can better manage it. Right. So that's Canada. That's what Canada is made up of. So ownership of the land is not the Canadian government, not the provincial governments, not the municipal governments. The ownership of the land is Indigenous governments, and the treaties share the land with the colonial governments. So that's the way the treaties are set up. And Indigenous people have been trying to honor this setup for centuries now. The treaties came into place in the late 1800s, mid 1800s, things like that. So in the early days, King George III of England recognized the rights of Indigenous people in the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which said Indigenous nations owned all lands except those that the Crown interpreted had been sold through treaties. No British colony in 1763 could take any new territory without creating some sort of treaty system with Indigenous people. And the treaties we have in Canada, the spirit of them is share the land. It is not give up the land or sell the land. So that's 1763. And in the United States, that's another reason why they decided to leave the British Empire. So they left because a multitude of reasons. They wanted to keep their slaves. They wanted to stop paying taxes to England. And they wanted to start expanding westward. But the Royal Proclamation prevented them as British citizens from expanding west. So that's just another reason why the United States broke away from the British Empire. And when the United States broke away, when the colonies broke away from the British Empire, each individual state or each individual colony became its own government, became its own federal government, essentially. And when they decided to become the United States, they're saying they're United States because they're united states, governments, federal governments. They were individual countries unto themselves at that point. But they decided, let's group together and make ourselves strong, right? So they became the United States as opposed to individual states. So that's different from Canada. The states in the United States, each individual state actually has a lot of power in comparison to their federal government. So states have more authority for their territory. Here in Canada, the provinces do not. The provinces and the municipalities, the towns and cities, they are an extension of the federal government. They're one government. They're not separate states put together, acting as one. So states are very powerful. The state governments, the governors of each state, they are powerful unto themselves and have a lot of authority to their people, over their people and over their territory. That's not the way it is in Canada. The provincial governments are in place, are there because the federal government created an act saying, let's create these provinces and we'll make it easier for them to conduct certain businesses, conduct certain services, things like that. And the federal government won't have to worry about that because they've delegated authority to the provinces. Excuse me. Let's have some tea. So, Canada is not like the United States. Each state really is very powerful. In Canada, each province is not. Each province is really just a lower bureaucratic level of the Canadian federal government. So, makes you think. The federal government does have the ability to force provinces to do certain things, but the federal government here in Canada has traditionally stayed away from using that power. But they can totally just tell the province to do what they want to do. So provinces and municipalities are extensions of the federal government here in Canada. So think about that. Let's relate it to business. Let's say we own a big business and we have several locations in different communities, and we've given authority to a local manager to run that location, run that office, run that store. We still own the store, but there's someone else managing it, and we're just getting reports from them and giving them support when they need support. But the board of directors for the overall company, they don't sit down and say, what about the Edmonton office? They're thinking of hiring this new person named James, and we should review their resume and then give them the go-ahead to hire James. No, they don't do that. They don't care about that. They don't give a hoot about any of that internal. They just care. The Edmonton office has increased profits by 5% last quarter. Great. They're on track. Let them keep going, right? But ask them if they need any extra help, right? So that's what the province is. And that's the same with municipalities in the province. Each individual municipality was created because the province said, we also have a lot of responsibility, but we can't manage each community. So we've given more responsibility. So each level of government has delegated some of their responsibility and authority for certain areas to the different levels of government. It's not different governments. It's all the same government. So they're all interconnected. They're all created because the government above them created them. Whereas Indigenous governments, individual First Nations, they have full authority of a federal, provincial, and municipal government. That's all wrapped into one for Indigenous governments. We have formed ourselves, all the different individual nations, within a treaty area have come together to create a group. The chiefs, all the chiefs of all the nations have agreed to come together and work together as a treaty area. But the treaty area does not have any authority over the individual First Nations within the treaty area. It's a bottom-up relationship. All these chiefs from the individual nations have all the authority for their nation, federal, provincial, and municipal authority, and they've come together and said, let's work together as a treaty area. And then we look at the larger Assembly of First Nations across Canada. Again, that is not a federal government. The Assembly of First Nations is not a level of Indigenous government. It is more like a lobby group, just like the treaty chiefs are together. They're more of a lobby group to work together to influence the Canadian government and to get the fair treatment that the treaties guaranteed so long ago. Oh, itchy eyeball. Oh. So, wait, I gotta finish scratching that eyeball. Oh. So, when there's a misconception that the Assembly of First Nations, the federal government, and the treaty areas are like provinces. They're not, right? And to say an individual First Nation is like a municipality, a city, town, or improvement area, whatever you want to call them, that's not true. That is not what these are. They are cooperatives, lobby groups, organizations that we've agreed to create so that we can better streamline our communications with the different levels of government. But there is no authority in the Assembly of First Nations to tell an individual First Nations how to govern themselves. There is no authority there. And that is a more similar relationship to the United States. The different states in the United States have said, we come together and we create this federal government. Right? But there's limited, there's more than the Indigenous relationship. The federal government can implement some things in the state, but the states really have more pushback power, similar to what a First Nation can do, because the First Nations hold all levels of the government. And it's these individual nations that are part of the treaties. It's not the treaty areas that have signed the treaties. So on one side, Great Britain now delegated to the Government of Canada the responsibilities are on one side of the treaty signing. On the other side of the treaty signing is 50, 100 different individual First Nations that are nations unto themselves. And so that's an interesting relationship that people don't think about and a lot of people don't talk about in public. This treaty relationship we have here. And it's so different. I wish I had created a chart for this for the United States. The United States really is a bottom-up thing. The states have a lot of power to influence the federal government in the United States. So, what do we got here? we've got a bunch of people, separatists, that want Alberta to separate from Canada. The United Conservative Party of Alberta is spearheading this push. And there's a lot of people within that party that want that sort of thing. All right. So now that we've looked at the organization of Canada in comparison to the United States, in reality, any country in the world could say to the United States, we want to join you and become one of your states. And that country would now become one of the United States. That's not how it works in Canada. A country can't really become a province of Canada. Like, that's awkward. That's weird. So if we're thinking about Alberta trying to, how do you say the word? Secede from Canada. Leave the federal government. All right. So we think, the general population seems to think that Alberta owns the territory of Alberta. The government, it's a misconception that the province of Alberta owns the territory we call Alberta. That is a misconception, a fallacy. The owners of the land, says King George, the Royal Proclamation of 1763 is still active, still legally binding within Canada. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 is part of Canada. It's what makes us Canada. Canada, the federal government of Canada has said, we are sharing this land with Indigenous peoples. Share. Okay. So, if a province wants to leave Canada, look at this structure. The federal government has decided to split up its sharing of the land into 3 different levels of government. So, it starts to get tricky here. What really happens if the people of Alberta vote to separate from Canada? They can't legally claim or take the territory of Alberta, because if the province of Alberta stops being a province, they don't take the land with them. The land doesn't go anywhere. The province essentially is dissolved. If Alberta separates from Canada, it just dissolves. There's no province anymore. We wiped the map out. The province of Alberta just doesn't exist anymore. And because the province delegated its authority of towns and municipalities to a lower level of government, this wasn't the federal government didn't say, we're creating a province and we're creating municipalities. The federal government said, we're creating a province. You handle those people in that territory under the treaties. It was the province that said, we're giving away some of our authority and responsibility to municipalities with the Municipalities Act of Alberta, right? So if the province separates, aka is dissolved, the territory can't be administered by the municipalities anymore, because the authority that municipalities got was from the province. Anything related to provincial regulations, legislation, responsibilities is just gone. So we have a province that leaves Canada. They can't take the territory. I'm going to explain that next. So they just get dissolved. They're just gone. There's no more Alberta. There's no more City of Edmonton. There's nothing. Nobody's in control colonially from the Canadian federal government. There's no longer anyone in control of this jurisdiction. It stays a part, the land stays a part of Canada because of the treaties. So, if the federal government loses or gives up its shared responsibilities to the land, who's in charge? Well, until the federal government gets around to saying, oh, the old territory of Alberta, we're instituting a new provincial or territorial government called so-and-so, and you'll have elections next year and you'll form a new government. So that's probably going to happen. And every municipality within the province would have to go through the same process after the new province or territory realigns itself and reorganizes itself. The land doesn't go anywhere because of the treaties. This is Canadian territory. By Canada, I mean Indigenous governments and the federal colonial government, right? The treaties says this is our territory that we are sharing. These two governments, the Canadian government and the Indigenous governments, are sharing this territory. So nobody can take it because there's two levels of this. Technically 3 levels. Canada is not just the colonial governments. The colonial government calls itself the government of Canada. The federal Canadian government, they call themselves that. But Canada really is only Canada, made up of this colonial government and all the hundreds of Indigenous governments combined. So the territory can't be given away or anything unless the treaties are also dissolved at the same time. So we know Alberta. Stop sharing that. And I will start sharing this other one. That's pretty big. Okay, maybe I'll keep myself small for this. But I want to get the whole map in there if I can. There we go. Well, there it comes. Sort of. Let's see if it lets me. No, that's not so good. That was better. Okay. So here's the province of Alberta. The green area up north, this is my treaty. I am a member of Treaty 8 with the Big Stone Cree Nation. Here's Big Stone Cree Nation right here. So that's treaty number 8, the sage green color. And then below it, we have treaty number 6, and that's where I live right now in Edmonton. Here, I'm in treaty 6. And then below that is treaty 7 in the orange. See, so Calgary and area. That's treaty 7. And then we also have treaty 4 way down here, just a tiny corner of the province, which is covered by treaty number 4. And then over here, this little bright green teal color, that's treaty number 10. So all the land of Alberta is shared based on these treaty areas with Indigenous peoples. So if Alberta was to try to leave Canada, first off, we talked about it, the Alberta government would just get dissolved because the provincial government is here on the authority of the Canadian government. It's the same government. It's not in the United States where the state said, we as a state, as a federal state of ourselves, are joining the United States, and together we're strong, right? They held the power at the state level and gave certain power to the federal government. Whereas in Canada, the colonial Canadian government gave power down. So it's all Canadian government. And they said, we're going to have province to administer this section. And then the province said, oh, we're going to have municipalities administer this further defined section, right? So the province gets dissolved. The legal provincial government and all the municipalities get dissolved if Alberta leaves. They can't take the territory with them. You're just dissolving the province, but not the territory, because the territory is tied to these treaty areas as a shared landmass. So if there's no provincial or municipal governments anymore, the federal government is basically, we got to set up something different. So they'll work on setting up a new province and they'll have that province set up new municipalities if that's how they want the area to be administered. But they may say the previous territory of Alberta is now being directly administered by this federal government minister. Maybe the senators from Alberta will become the administrators of the Alberta territory. Like, there's a lot of options for them. But I'm saying the province, if it leaves, tries to separate, all it's doing is dissolving its governmental status. That's it. Because they can't take the territory, because the territory is being shared with the treaties. So if Alberta is to leave, then all the Indigenous First Nations within Alberta and the Métis Nations of Alberta all have to agree to leave also. And they've all got skin in the game. They're all sharing the land as well. So, but the supreme document here is the treaties. With no treaties, there is no Alberta. Without treaties, there is no Canada. So Do the treaty areas, at least temporarily, become the administrative body, the administrative government for this landmass until the federal government can set something else up permanently? So if Alberta votes to separate, they're only dissolving their government. Immediately, Indigenous territory becomes the rule of law, becomes the administering sections of this province. Treaty 8 and all the Treaty 8 chiefs are now in charge of Northern Alberta. Treaty 6 and all the Treaty 6 chiefs are in charge of Central Alberta. And Southern Alberta is administered by the Treaty 7 chiefs. So there is, never fear, there is another layer of government that have a legal right to Alberta and will help keep us from separating to the United States. Now, in the United States, Indigenous people are considered conquered people because of the Indian Wars and leaving England and throwing out the Royal Proclamation of 1763. They took the territory. So I don't think, the United States would care about Indigenous rights whatsoever. But Canada must. The provinces must. Certainly the municipalities must. Because Canada has signed the UN DRIP, the United Nations Declarations for the rights of Indigenous peoples. And treaties must be honored. So, yeah. If the province of Alberta separates, the government gets dissolved, and the treaty areas now have administrative control over the different territories of Alberta. We now have basically 5 mini provinces, all administered by the treaty areas until the federal government recreates the province. And it would be interesting. Imagine if Canada decided we're going to create 3 provinces based on the treaty areas. And just to spite the Albertans that voted to separate, we're going to take away those 2 the Treaty 10 and the Treaty 4 area, and we're going to give those little chunks to Saskatchewan. Because Saskatchewan, those treaties are mainly in Saskatchewan, not in Alberta. So then the new boundaries of these 3 little provinces, that would be awesome. Treaties, the province of Treaty 7, the province of Treaty 6, the province of Treaty 8, missing the little chunks for Treaty 10 and Treaty 4. That would be all right. Oh my God. Oh my. So that's the legal standing of the territory of Canada. It is being equally shared between Indigenous First Nations and the Canadian federal government. It's not the provinces, it's not the municipalities. It's these 2 governments that are sharing the territory together like a big sandwich. We saw the map. We see the land. We see the treaties sharing the land. And then we see the two overlaying governments that are working together. And it's those two overlaid governments, Indigenous governments, and the Canadian government, which makes Canada. Canada is not a singular nation. Canada is hundreds of nations coming together. And if we think about it that way, the treaties give First Nations the same sort of power that a state in the United States has. The treaties say all these people give Canada its authority to share this land, to use this land. So, think about that, man. Think about that. So it's we gotta think about those parallels, the things the UCP is doing. They're underfunding healthcare, so they can say public healthcare doesn't work, so that they can privatize it, so that some corporate capitalists can make money. The UCP is eroding the rights of people that are different, namely the LGBTQ plus community. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like what's happening in the United States, which is also shadowing Nazi Germany? The same tactics? Why? Canada's all about sharing the land. So why are we creating scapegoats? In Canada, nobody's a scapegoat. We're all here working together. And our diversity makes us stronger. The movement to separate from Canada. And why is a province doing trade visits to the United States? They're trying to separate. It's all been part of the show. It's all been there. I think a lot of times we think that sort of stuff can't happen to us in our country. We're in the Western world, and those sorts of things don't happen. It's happening in the States right now, man. People getting rounded up by a secret police force. The UCP is trying to create a provincial police force. Now, the argument is, well, Ontario has their Ontario police force. Most Canadians live in Ontario, so a little extra police is justified. But here in Alberta, 11% of Canadians live in Alberta. I argue that we shouldn't really need municipal police forces for our big cities. The RCMP could do it. But of course, Indigenous people have a bad history with the RCMP, because the RCMP was created to help get rid of the Indigenous people in the Northwest Territories of Canada, which is now Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba and BC, right? So why would this UCP government want to create a provincial police force? It's so that they have their own police force. just like President Trump has his ICE forces, right? Like they're a federal police force. And they got nothing to do with the state police or the local sheriffs or anything like that, right? So why would the province want this? Secret police. Nazi Germany. It's happening. It's happening. So what can we do? Peaceful protest. If you want Alberta to not separate, and at the same time you want a change in government that's a little bit less radical. I mean, they always talk about the radical left. I mean, there's nobody radical on the left. The people on the left are a bunch of tree huggers. We're not dangerous at all, right? But when someone thinks someone else can do something bad or negative, it is because that person themselves know they would do that. They would do that tactic. Yes, I would do that evil thing. So I assume and I accuse you of planning to do the same thing. There's nobody violent on the left. Being on the left is to be nonviolent in nature. So, peaceful protest. I had heard of this a long while ago, but completely forgot about it. And it's the 3.5% rule. It's not perfect. It depends on the government, I guess, and the location. But if 3.5% of the local population are able to sustain a long-term protest, then governments are forced to change. It's a tipping point. If we got 1 million people in Edmonton, so 3 times 0.035, so that's 35,000 people. If the city of Edmonton could get 35,000 people to protest peacefully for a long term, then things could change. Governments would be forced to change. So if we look at the 5 million people that now live in Alberta, times 0.035, Alberta would need 175,000 people across the province to peacefully protest on a regular basis. The provincial government would be forced to change because it's a tipping point. I don't know the sociological background of that, but that's what the research says. And if you're on the left like me, you believe in research and you believe in facts and things like that. So 3.5% of the people need to get out there and peacefully protest. This isn't violent protesting. This isn't rioting. This is just people in the streets chanting, holding up their signs. Nobody's getting hurt. Right. Once you get to that threshold, that tipping point, things will change. I think it's related to, from an HR point of view, when I'm in an organization, there's the quiet majority of people. They don't speak out, they don't protest, but this is most of us. Most of us are quiet majority. But at each end of the political spectrum, we have people that are vocal. So we have the people on the left, who are yelling, we need to make changes, everything's terrible, or whatever. They're being vocal. And then you have people on the right that are like, no, everything's good, we need to help our rich billionaires, whatever, right? But they're vocal. So you got vocal people on both sides. But if you can get that 3%, 3.5% of people protesting, that's being vocal. And it influences society or the organization. So if we are in an organization of 10 people, and you have one person who's always saying, let's do this, and another person who's saying, let's do this, they're trying to convince the people in the middle, the silent majority. So if you can get a couple extra people to be vocal on one side or the other, the rest of the people will be more confident in their choices to do something else, one or the other, whichever way you're talking about it, right? So if you can get that 3.5% people to peacefully protest, you can actually make changes in the world. Governments fall, governments change, policies change. Imagine if there's 175 to 200,000 people every day protesting across Alberta. Think of your town, the size of your town, the size of your community. If you have a community of 6,000 people, one of the mid-sized communities in Alberta, 6,000 times 0.035, you need 210 people to be at the town office every day protesting. At the town office or on Main Street, just 210 people for a community of 6,000 people. So think about that in your community. How do you organize 3.5% of the community to be to be part of your peaceful protest to make change? We hear people talk about, there's always violent people in there. A lot of time that's the provocateurs. The other side of the argument send people in to try to make the peaceful protesters not look peaceful. Provocateurs. They're not really with that group. They come in and they try to stir stuff up so that the cops can justify cracking down on these peaceful protesters, right? Yeah, so that's what you can do. You want to make a change anywhere for anything, find 3.5% of the people in the population of that town, of that province, of that country, of that organization. Get that 3.5% being vocal, being peacefully vocal. Because I'm a non-violent person. I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't care who you are. I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to die. I want you to live. I want us all to learn to live together. Nobody's evil. We are all just trying to survive. We all have different opinions on how we survive. And some of these opinions can seem evil, especially when they're directly related to Nazi Germany, right? Someone who's different is not the cause of your problems. Get together with that different person and ask them, how can we work together? How can we solve our problems? All right. Talk to y'all tomorrow.